Hello and a warm welcome to the CNBC Africa special in partnership with the Department of Science and Technology. I'm Guguletu Cele. Well, today we come to you live from the CSIR International Convention Center in the city of Tshwane, and this is where the Science Forum South Africa for 2017 is currently in session. And this year, like in previous years, we look to cultivate conversations around science and technology, not only being a propeller and enabler for economic growth and development targets, but of course for governments to also meet their Millennium Development Goals. But what does this mean when government is the main stakeholder, often viewed as the catalyst in order to drive this kind of development? What about the youth? What about Africans leading African solutions for African problems by participating in conversations regarding robotics, digitalization, and of course how we need to ensure that we have sufficient energy and power in order to enable these particular spheres of economic growth? Well, that's exactly what we tend to look into in the next hour of this live broadcast, and we'll be doing so by speaking to my esteemed panelists who will be unpacking their different perspectives with regard to digitalization and robotics. And of course, we have audiences, members who will be participating with us in this conversation, giving us their overview as well as insight into their views and conversations that they'd like to have with regard to robotics. Allow me to introduce my panelists. Firstly, as you can tell, made up of all females, showing once more that maybe women can run the world, or perhaps that's just my bias. Closest to my right is Ms. Barbara Glover from NEPAD Planning and Coordinating Agency, followed by Emma Duncan from Corporate Training Solutions based in Ghana, and Dr. Zamantungwa Kumalo, who's the Future Leader Youth Development Program representative who joins us with us. Not forgetting that we are making use of technology to enable us to connect with our peers and colleagues from across the globe. As such, we also have joining us via Skype Admiral Joe Sestak, who's from First Global, coming to us live from the United States. You can also participate with us on social media in this conversation and sharing your questions and views with us, making use of the account name at CNBC Africa, and the official hashtag to use is SFSA 2017. That's for Science Forum South Africa 2017. Well, we'd like to get the conversation on the road now, and I'd like to gauge by the audience firstly, when we hear the term robotics, digitalization, the fourth industrial revolution, how many of you are actually riddled with fear, wondering whether or not your jobs will be taken away and if you might have any relevance in the next 10 to 15 years? Show of hands, any of you quite fearful by the words and terms robotics and technology? I see quite a few hands up, and that's obviously a clear indicator as to how many South Africans and Pan-Africans also feel that way. Let's start with that particular theme, Barbara, and I'd like to start with you, given that you do have a background in your understanding of robotics. Friend or foe? Should we fear or should we embrace this new technological dynamic as well as digital revolution that us as the African continent are looking to make our way into?
Well, thank you for having me on the panel. I believe that we have challenges as a continent, and most of these challenges will be addressed efficiently with robotics and artificial intelligence. And with every new technology or innovation, there's always that fear of the unknown, of the uncertainties that will come with the technologies. But I believe that with time, and if we have discussions such as these and start early to think through these technologies and their use and how we can circumvent any problems that are associated with these technologies, we'll better be able to handle them as they come in, because it's inevitable actually. They're going to come in. I was earlier this morning, I was having a discussion with the SABC anchor, and I was telling her that we use Siri on our iPhones, and that's artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
We seem to underestimate the fact that it's already here. It's not something strange that is coming in.
In our minds, though, it seems as though there's this machine.
No, we think of RoboCop and all those weird things when we think of robotics, but we have artificial intelligence all around. I mean, if you go to Google and search for something online, you're using artificial intelligence, and it's already here. So it's better we have the discussions now and know how to move forward with it.
So, friend, not foe.
Friend.
Emma, I'd like to get your perspective, especially given that your background is actually working and training staff members within corporate spaces, not only in Ghana, but across the continent too. Again, this is often where technology is viewed as a threat to reducing the workforce. How do you interpret technology as well as robotics and digitalization in your particular sphere?
Well, to be honest, first of all, greetings from Ghana. And to be honest, it's scary. Especially because I don't have a tech background, but I deal a lot with women who have no idea what's happening. We have some of our audiences are involved in tech. They're doing amazing, but the majority, it's like we don't know what's happening and we don't even care. I was listening to you on air today when you mentioned that 7 million jobs are going to be lost and then be replaced by 2 million. What happens to the 5 million? So we really need to get these conversations going. And from the little I have seen from the ladies who are already in tech, they are doing amazing. They are shooting. I mean, when you go on the Fabulous Woman Network page, we've shared stories about women in tech who are just rocking the world. And they are Africans from Ghana and around the world. I mean, well, Ghana and other places, right? So we really need to have the conversation. And all this morning I kept thinking, Amma, you need to do more. Even though you're not in the space, you need to get yourself there. And because the reason I need to do more is because I'm already having an audience of women who are capable. So we need to do more, share more stories, get them to know that, listen, how is it called, AI? Is already here, whether you like it or not, and it's coming. So do something, take advantage of it.
Take advantage of it, embrace it. So again, from your perspective, friend, not foe.
Can I say friend foe?
Friend foe.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the most honest conversations and representations we've probably had, given the fear that obviously exists with regard to this.
Yeah.
Zamantung, I'd also like to come to you, and obviously taking a look at it from your perspective, where you also work in rural environments with individuals who probably the greatest form of technology that they're aware of is their cell phone. How do we even get to understand and conceptualize the concept of artificial intelligence when engaging with individuals from such platforms who have yet to receive that kind of support of enhanced technological solutions?
Okay, it's a different story in rural areas because, as you are saying, we're only limited to our cell phones. But then I'll say in terms of technology in rural areas, it has an ability to reach bigger audiences with very consistent and quality of content. So if we go towards it, we know that people will receive knowledge that is consistent at any times, and it is of quality at any time. We won't lose that information at any time. So I would say it's quite advantageous. I'll also point out the fact, as I'm a scientist, I work in the lab. I've also had that we'll be having more of robotics to extract DNAs, to do a lot of things using robotics. And people were quite frightened by that fact. But then I still say that whoever came up with the robotics, it's the human mind. So we still need human resource. We can't run away from that fact. So I'd say, although it is there, but then we still need human resource in coming up and also implementation of the whole ideas. So that's it from my side.
Friend or foe from your perspective?
I'll say I'm a friend.
Friend.
Yes.
Friend to technology.
Yes.
Joe, I'd like to come to you, being based in the US, and of course your extensive CV really speaks to the environment where you've operated in, and robotics are probably your friends right now, and I'm expecting a robot to actually creep up in the background given where you are at home. But of course you have an outsider's view, given that you come from a developed economy, which has been one of the front runners when it comes to technological advancements, IA, and of course robotics. How do you see robotics impacting the African economic landscape once we see this kind of development really unfolding and being pushed across the African continent, given that you come with an outsider's view?
I'm a necessary friend. I'm not a STEM guy. Just a sailor basically over 30-some years around this globe. But I came to recognize, as the Academy of Science of China and the Academy of Science of Great Britain and the Academy of Science of America that just hosted another event together this year, that we face such grand global challenges in every continent, from climate change all the way over to health care, that STEM may be the only way that we can together actually face this. So as far as a priority for the African continent, it isn't just for Africa. This world needs to have Africa involved. In FIRST Robotics, we really went out of our way in the very first year, just 4 months ago, to have over 40 countries send a robotics team from Africa. About 80% of those never had touched a robot, and most of them had not had any STEM education before. There is no way that we can ever face these global challenges that we have before us unless we have Africa and all the continents doing this together. The value of having done this first global was that I think the greatest power in the world is not the military. The greatest power in the world is not our economy. They're the foundation for what the greatest power of the world is, and that is convening, bringing people together, actually face common challenges. We may not have a planet that's as livable in the end of this century unless we're able to do this, and STEM can hold the key. They're doing things under a woman in France to use robotics to help autistic children come out of their shell and become much more participatory in social life. They're using robotics out there in Japan that has such an aging population and has a very small immigration policy program in order to take care of our elders. From healthcare to the environment, there is no way that we can face what's coming unless we are able to be friends of STEM. And that means that the less developed, where STEM is less robust, have to be on board if we are to face these global challenges together.
Exactly. So critical elements that you've certainly highlighted there with regard to robotics and of course some life-saving innovations that have certainly come through from more developed economies. But I also want us to bring it back home because essentially we are speaking within the African context of addressing some of the challenges that we have on the continent. And Barbara, this is probably where your focus comes in because when we think robotics, again, you referred to RoboCop, but there are other small elements and technological revolutions that we make use of that have actually had a positive impact in our day-to-day lives. I'd like us to take an overview of some of your experiences and observations that you've seen within the African context of tangible solutions provided by robotics that have actually led to a difference in the lives of many Africans across the continent. What have your observations been in order to allay our fears and encourage us to continue having these conversations?
Well, I believe that, first of all, there's so much going on in the continent that most people are not aware of in terms of robotics and artificial intelligence. And if I want to give examples, I remember last Christmas I spent some part of it in Accra and some part of it in Abidjan. And so there's this craze now, I don't know if it's in South Africa, but in Western Africa, where you go to weddings and they use drones to take pictures and, you know, have beautiful views and all of that. And drones are similarly robotics that can be used in other fields. So it's being used, for instance, yesterday I was listening to the news where they talked about current drought situations in Western Cape, where farmers are very worried. Drones actually can be used in addressing such irrigation problems, in addressing and watering huge plantations and monitoring soil characteristics and so many other things that farmers face on their farms. And so the technologies are there. I believe that what has to be done is to channel it rightly and use it profitably on the continent. If a young person sees that there are drones being used in agriculture, it encourages the youth to go into agriculture because of how cool it becomes now. You don't have a cutlass and a hoe and a dirty apparel. You have drones. Someone can start a drone company that hires it out to farmers. So there's so many things that we can that already exist and that we use for other things. Other than selfies and wedding pictures, we can divert them into things that would help the continent.
I want us to pick up on that just for a moment and really to peel back at the layers because that also needs some kind of policy intervention because whilst drones can be used in certain markets on the continent, there are some strict regulations specific to South Africa with regard to the use as well as licensing of some of these elements. And that to a certain extent almost has the opportunity to hinder or develop some kind of innovative development. From your perspective, from a policy direction, how do we ensure that not only do our policies speak to each other as members of the same continent, but also that we're actually cultivating an environment where innovation can be used?
I believe that's why discussions like this are important, where we sort of demystify these technologies and get people talking about them. And once people are talking about them and there's interest, it pushes policymakers to make interventions that are necessary. I would want to chip in the reason where this session came out from. There's actually a panel by the African Union called the African Union Panel on Emerging Technologies. And they are looking into all these technologies, such as drones, and looking into policies and regulatory issues that come with individual countries with technologies of this nature. And the hope is that at the end, there will be reports that will come out at the Heads of State Summit next year, where they proffer to heads of state solutions to these problems and hindrances to the advancement of emerging technologies on the continent, and speak about important technologies like that. So I believe this panel's work and then future discussions like this, this discussion came out of the work of the panel where they wanted to engage young people in emerging technologies. So future discussions like this would help ultimately to demystify it and then push for policies. And
Exactly. You mentioned something so critical, which is the involvement of young people, and many of you might be aware that the African continent, 75% of the population is under the age of 35. However, we know that the challenge is that a vast majority of those individuals are actually unemployed or unemployable, given the lack of skills that they have within specific sectors. And this, of course, comes as another threat when it comes to the introduction of technology, digital innovation, as well as robotics. I want to come to you here, Amma, to get your perspective as well regarding these dynamics that, again, maybe from a policy perspective, governments need to prioritize human capital development in correspondence with actually making sure that robotics do have a positive implication on the development and advancement of the various economies that we serve. How do you gauge this going forward, and of course making sure that the 75% of young Africans out there don't end up jobless, but however, use and capitalize robotics to actually leapfrog their development and advancement too?
Okay, I'd like to answer that by telling you about my personal experience with robots.
Sure.
Zero.
Oh.
Yes, I you know, the only robots I've seen are in the movies. But my daughter, who is 8, when recently I traveled and she wanted a drone. And yeah, she had it actually. She flew it into the neighbor's house, and long story.
That comes with its own set of problems, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But now she's 8 and she's interested because they are seeing it on TV and it's being talked about. My school, Archbishop Porter Girls Secondary School, recently went to DC, Washington DC, for some robotic competitions and all these that I never knew of when I was back in school. So I think that there is progress in terms of, and a lot of these are being funded by governments and NGOs, which is good, but we need to do more, definitely. We need to, and it's really encouraging that we have a lot of girls, like I mentioned, my daughter, she's a girl, and then all these girls involved in these robotics and all. It's good, and it also challenges people like us who have no experience at all. You're like, okay, we need to be interested in this.
I'd like to get in on that, because surely as someone who moves into a corporate environment focused on women development as well as youth development, there must be several questions that corporate leaders actually pose to you as to what do we do? Do we upskill this workforce? Do we leave them by the wayside? Do we adopt the robotics and technology? How do we ensure that we actually strike a perfect balance? What are those critical questions, in other words, that CEOs and corporate leaders are actually asking you about this digital age?
Right. They know it's coming and they need to do something, so they are training.
But they're scared.
Oh, yes. I mean, wouldn't you?
I would be.
Yes, they are, but there are steps. There are, training stuff on it. But yes, with regards to the training, another thing that makes it difficult sometimes is the words that are used in the training. Like I was recently interviewing a certain young lady who has found herself into tech. Before she wasn't even interested. And she tells me that she used to go for meetings and they would mention words like SEO, ICO, and code, and Python. And she's like, Python is a snake. So I think that,
but
also
for those of us who actually aren't aware, because I also know Python as a snake, right? Like many of you, just elaborate on what the technological term of Python actually is.
It's supposed to be a software on an app or something,
I bet half of you didn't know that, like I didn't, right? Exactly.
So these are the things. You go into these meetings and they are using these big words that we don't understand. Make learning easy and simple, because women, we can actually do this. Explain it to us and then we are there. We will create all these amazing robotics and all, but use simple English when training us on how to use it. Yeah.
And that raises quite a critical element, because again, coming back to the communities and environment that you work in, here we're speaking to an urban audience, an audience who could have taken out their phones a few minutes ago and actually Googled what Python is in the technological space, but we have that opportunity because we are enlightened to it. However, the ladies that you interact with, the youth groups that you interact with from rural areas across South Africa, unfortunately don't have that opportunity to get that far. However, I understand that despite some of these challenges, you've actually found some positive outcomes to address some of these concerns. Give us an idea as to what some of these solutions are that you've managed to implement.
Okay, I'd like to point out just some factors which brings about the gap in accessing technology first. You get that in rural areas there's socio-economic selection. Like most of people who are from rural areas, they depend on pensioners' money to survive. Their parents are not educated as well, and you get to nutrition as well, they're not eating well, and those are the factors that then hinder them into accessing technology. You talk about intergenerational gap, which is very high in rural areas, whereby the parents' educational interests, they are not matching the skills as well as abilities that are demanded by labor in our days. So if our parents do not have education, it means that it subjects us to a cycling deprivation or deprivation cycle that goes on and on and on. And then you get to regional gap at a national level. You get the fact that you get the fact that there is urban concentration. People are going to urban areas because they're more advanced. There is where there is technology. But then what I have came to understand is that ICT, it is a solution to rural areas, which is information communication technology. It can be a cell phone, use of email, use of your computer, any other way. What we have done back in Bergville when we went there to view the schools, how are they set up, how are they functioning, we found that the situation was very bad to an extent that their toilet, they're not in good standard. And if the infrastructure is not conducive for them to be very productive at school, then we need to take it back there before we introduce technology. So what we did, we secured sponsor for them. They looked after their infrastructure, so the school now is on a top level now, I would say. We've also brought about a library books. And in their computer room, they didn't have computers at all, but we're working towards that. And I would say it's infrastructure that we need to look after at rural areas first before we move into technology, because you can't just bring technology when the infrastructure or the environment is not conducive.
Yeah, and that certainly does need a multi-pronged approach, not only from that physical infrastructure to make sure that their livelihood is taken care of, but energy and power, because essentially we all know what happens when your batteries go flat for your phone or your tablet.
Exactly.
You disconnected from the rest of the world, and that also has serious implications for your access to information, access to technological advancements and solutions as well. Joe, this makes me want to come to you, because I do understand that you've worked on several interventions as well too in trying to cultivate a mindset regarding robotics as well as innovative technologies that need to be developed. Whilst you've certainly participated in some with regard to innovations that have come out from the United States, I want us as well to speak now to the labor force and what you've witnessed with regard to elements that need to change with regard to education, making sure that this workforce that needs to lead the charge head to head with robotics is actually on par in order to communicate not only with the machinery, but communicate with other humans in technological terms, and making sure that a coder here in South Africa can speak to a coder in Washington, can speak to a coder in Abidjan, can speak to a coder in Accra.
Yes, look, I think you faced one of the great challenges that we are going to have. But yet the result can be tremendous. We had 157 countries send high school teams, high school age teams here to America. First off, over 60% of those teams came about something you opened up with your first remarks. They were led or organized or founded by a woman, particularly in Africa. My wife works over in Africa, and that led to one contact that led to many others, such as STEM Bees, Tech Women, Girls Tech. There is a hunger out there for a labor force that is going to be led by women. I'd asked that African woman once, why? Why are women making this happen for First Global? She says, because we really are the ones who can see the impact on our family. But the result was tremendous. Benin came in second out of 157 countries. Second, where they'd never done STEM or robotics before. The United States came 121. The results in Liberia, which is a very rural county, where again, they'd never seen a robot, never done STEM education, to where communications, as was just mentioned, the infrastructure wasn't there. You would see them, they'd send a photograph. After 24 hours, someone would manage to send us a photograph of them working late at night, no electricity, holding up a flashlight, and only a few hours a day could they get to an internet. You go to Mali, and you find that because of what happened, that now the government is investing. To make this labor force work, it isn't going to be just government. Look, we're having our own challenges with our government right now, with decreases in some of the investments and resources that need to be put into STEM. But in Africa, unless there's a partnership with private businesses, corporations, with someone else happen to show it is in their interest with this youthful population, not just for them, but for themselves, to be able to have a job that can accrue profits, obviously, to these corporations. At a partnership with NGOs, where government may end up being a facilitator. In some ways, government sometimes even became an obstacle as we were trying to make things happen around this world. But the result was manifold. When Mali asked for kids to come, they had over 200 children show up just to try to make it happen. In Afghanistan, where when I was on the ground there at the beginning of the conflict, the illiteracy rate of women was 98%. Because of what just happened, President Ghani has now opened up 4 STEM centers, and 200 girls applied to go to the first one. When you go out to Myanmar, when they held their first one in a rural county, 10 kids showed up. By the 6th time, 60 kids had shown up. And yet the result was that so many undeveloped nations that had to be funded to come here, again, resources, to make that labor force actually grow. Many, if not the majority of them, came from less developed nations. It's not trying to find the greatness in the youth. It's there. It's just being able to elicit it with the right resources in a partnership that is from the developed countries to the developing countries. Because again, to my opening comments, unless the developing countries are involved, we can't face our global challenges. But I would argue that the little I saw, it will take a demographic women, and it will take a union with place corporations and nonprofits to truly facilitate this, to make it happen. At least that was the outcome that we saw.
Partnerships is certainly a critical element that you mentioned, and after the ad break, we'll certainly gauge this by speaking and engaging with our panelists as well as audience members in the room, trying to really configure and understand if there is a particular model that can be implemented on the African continent in order to restore these partnerships, the trust within these partnerships, in order to ensure that implementation also does take place with regard to fast-tracking digitalization within the African continent, and the youth really opening up their minds in order to welcoming in this and capitalizing on the opportunity that exists. We're going to take a short ad break for the moment. We'll be back with more unpacking the youth using technology to their factor as well as cultivating economic growth on the African continent. Stay with us. We'll be back with more after this. Welcome back. You're still watching the CNBC Africa special, coming to you live from the CSIR International Convention Center in the city of Tshwane, where the Science Forum South Africa for 2017 is taking place. We've been engaged in conversation, taking a look at how Africans can really shape the Africa of the future by taking advantage of the digital age. Everything from artificial intelligence, robotics, as well as this digital revolution that's taking place, and making sure that not only do we enhance and upskill our workforce, but also have a significant positive economic impact on the economies that we operate in. Well, we had this conversation in just a moment with our panelists. However, we're going to gauge from the audience now, who have some questions and feedback with regard to how we can fast track this particular experience. We do have questions from the audience. I do understand that you have the mic first, sir. We'll take questions in a series of 3, then get a response from our panelists, and then come back to the audience for a second round of questions. We'd like to commence with you, sir. If you could please stand up and introduce yourself, pose your question or opinion to the panelists.
Yeah, my name is Richard Glover. I work with the ICSU Regional Office for Africa. I wish to say that I'm the proudest person in the audience here, because Barbara there is my second born, and she's one of those coming up with this idea. This is fantastic. And I want to say that the idea of robotics should not be something that we should be scary of. At the end of the day, I believe that efficiency in work is more important than just talking about how many people are at work. We look around and we see people, so many people are at work, but how many hours do they spend doing actual work? So if we have a system that will ensure that work that is needed to be done is properly done, for me, it is the best way forward. Let's encourage them. change or bringing new things is, there's always resistance to it. Even in our body, if you want to put in something which is not part of your body, it will resist it in the first point. But bringing the idea across and bringing it out properly will ensure that the policymakers listen to them, and then we can introduce robotics. So it's just a comment. I'm not asking a question. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, sir. Much appreciated, Mr. Clover. We have the gentleman behind you with a follow-up question.
Good morning, panel. Dr. Wynand Louw from the National Metrology Institute of South Africa here on the CSIR campus. And I'm also the head of the Secretariat of the Intra-Africa Metrology System. We've got 45 members across the continent. Ghana Standards Board in Accra is one of them. So we attended a technical committee meeting of the African Union Commission in Rwanda earlier this year. And we discussed what will happen if we implement a continental free trade area in Africa. And of course, if you do away with customs, you need to put other things in place to follow the movement of products over the border. And we are starting to discuss how we can do that with automated measuring instruments and other systems at airports and so on. You all are aware of biometrics that you can use at airports. And I perhaps want to ask the panel if any one of them have got any ideas on the implementation of automated systems and robotics at customs at airports. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for your question. Very insightful and something that will certainly open up border gates across the continent to encourage intra-African trade. We'll come to you, sir, with your question.
Good morning. I'm Michael Khan. I'm an independent policy analyst working in South Africa and the region. By 2050, Africa will be the most populous continent, 2 billion people estimated, very, very high proportion of young people, eager to get ahead. We'll be in the middle of the fourth industrial revolution, and according to Joseph Stiglitz, the path that East Asia followed of low-cost production will probably not be open to us. So the 4RI presents both opportunity and threat. If we get it wrong, if social cohesion breaks down, we will have a continent-wide Arab, autumn or spring, where people will be very unhappy. So what does the panel think the actual way forward is? Will it be for everybody to have their robot? Will it be for everybody to automate everything? Or will there be a place for more conventional forms of work? Thank you.
Fantastic question. Thank you so much, Mr. Khan, as well as the question that we had from Dr. Lowe, as well as feedback from Mr. Glover. I actually think let's pick up with Mr. Khan's question with regard to 2050. Quite correct that we will be one of the population well above 2 billion people. And if it is actually a viable option for us to actually move down this disruptive as well as digital age on the African continent. Barbara, let's actually get your feedback and response to that question first.
Okay. I think we shouldn't see it as whether it's an option, because it's going to happen. That's my mindset, because we already have our systems integrated with these. However, what we should look at is how to handle clashes. So for instance, in our educational systems, if we know that in 2050, for instance, we wouldn't have need for admins and people who do secretarial jobs, or because there would be artificial intelligence to do those. What do we do to our educational system for schools that are training admins? And that's why I believe it's important that young people have this discussion now, because they are going to be the working class then who will be laid off jobs because artificial intelligence has taken over. And it is very important that we speak now, because it's our jobs. 2050, I believe not. We will probably be able to count the number of people in this meeting right now who will be there in 2050, maybe. But then the young people who would be there as the workforce have to start talking now, because it's their jobs we are talking about.
I want to build up on Mr. Khan's question and actually push you on it a little bit further with regard to, right, we need to have that conversation, but what kind of conversation are we having? Sure, we might be embracing technology, but in what capacity? Because as he alluded to, we might continue with the excessive laborious path of trying to develop our economies, either through manufacturing, which is actually booming across many economies in East Africa. How then do we embrace that conversation and take it forward? In other words, identify specific sectors where technology is at the forefront versus other sectors where we use technology, however, not at the same level of extreme.
So then it all comes down to engaging the relevant stakeholders. For instance, as I spoke about revamping our educational system and our curriculum and really looking at the jobs for the future and which ones are essential and which are not. So engaging the relevant stakeholders. But the sense of urgency would only come if the people that will be affected then address it now. And that's what the session is about and this title is about, that the future decides today. You'd have to address your future jobs today, because maybe in future that job wouldn't be there.
Exactly.
And then we would have to address the challenges that come with it, and also look at other job opportunities, because I think in Africa we have a streamlined mindset when it comes to jobs. Like, you grow up and you're intelligent and your parents tell you, okay, you be a doctor or you be a lawyer. And there isn't any diversity in our job market. And we don't explore that, okay, I can be a rocket scientist, or I can design apps, and I can be a software developer. We don't really, some people just accidentally fall into it, but we don't really see it as job prospects. So we need to really think about our jobs, what we call jobs, and begin to think about the jobs for the future and the ones that we should prepare for.
Exactly. You were agreeing, Amal, when it came to education, that came up in the response there. Your response very briefly before we move to Dr. Lowe's question.
Yes, we definitely need to work on the educational system, but we know it involves a lot of policy, and we know how long these things take to change. So I would also use this platform to encourage women leaders, people who are into capacity building and all that. You don't need to go through a lot of bureaucracies to change the way you work. This is what's happening. Let's take advantage of it and start training people, women, youth, everybody, boys, girls, train them and tell them. We need to, like Akofa mentioned, sorry, Barbara, the sense of urgency, it needs to be there, because 2050 is not really that far off. It's happening.
Well, let's hope we'll still be around there too.
I will
with
be.
The robots.
I will be.
I want to bring Joe in to get a response to Dr. Lowe's question with regard to feedback on automated systems. Any ideas on how we can potentially implement automated systems with regard to customs specifically, in order to track and monitor progress with regard to trade, intra-African trade that takes place on the continent? Joe, your feedback in response to this, are there any ideas or solutions that you're able to provide with this feedback?
I think it was a great question, actually. I can remember transiting between one African country to another and standing in line to get through for over 4 hours. Think of the cost that has to do to an economy. And that was just one country, as I try to get from one border to the other. I think my best recommendation was to pay attention closely to what's happening in Northern Ireland right now. As the United Kingdom is going through Brexit, as it exits or tries to exit the European Union, they're coming to grips with how to deal with this island off of England, where you have one nation, Ireland, and then north of that, Northern Ireland, which is part of UK. How are they going to impose some sort of a customs system that is going to be automated? And that's what they're talking about, and yet not be intrusive, because right now the European Union, it's just free flow among all those 30 plus countries. And all of a sudden they have to step back in time and establish some sort of a border of customs there. And they're talking very much about how to do it through automation, so that it doesn't seem to be a constitutional issue as you go and flow goods from England to part of Great Britain, Northern Ireland, and then have to go through another country to Ireland. I've been following it in The Economist and other areas, but my recommendation to the doctor that brought it up was try to look at that. If I could jump on to that other issue on education law, this is really the proverbial chicken and egg. Education is truly every country's homeland defense. There's nothing more important than that. And yet I can remember two different women talking to in two different African countries. And even for those who have been fortunate enough to get a bit of STEM education, the question arose, now where's the companies for their jobs? That's why this is going to take resources, yes. And as someone said earlier, everyone's not going to be the rocket scientist. There is stuff that you can do in nanotechnology that just to be the nano fabricator. The artisan with their hands of old is quite a skilled STEM job. Somehow that marriage that has commercial benefits, that can excite corporations to bring the resources in and to make that marriage then to where to get that education force on the basic level, not unlike how China did decades ago or Japan after World War II, is going to be instrumental to this because of the study that just came out recently, that by the time frame you're talking about, 1/3 of the jobs in this world will disappear that we're talking about. They will be taken over by others, but only if we've trained the workforce to do that. And the resources to do that have to come from the private sector, not just government, because governments, all governments, have a paucity of those resources at this time.
Exactly. You mentioned something quite critical there, which is obviously looking at jobs of the future and conversations that the youth need to be having. And I think, 10, 15 years ago, if you mentioned that someone might be a social media strategist, someone would have looked at you and actually scratched their head and thought, what on earth are you talking about? But that naturally speaks to sectors as well as industries that are developing, which will be future job creators. And how do we then speak to our youth to encourage them to study the right courses, to participate in the right spheres of industry, to be relevant in future industries that they're not even aware of right now that might exist. So social media strategist was a foreign concept at least 15 years ago. How do we fast track education and training to be relevant for future industries that we're not even aware of right now? Are there means and methods in which we can use and capitalize science, technology, as well as mathematics in order to attempt this? Or are we just flying blindly? An open question to the panel.
Like, a simplest answer will be like career expos and platform like this as well, whereby youth will be gathering together and get to see the new technologies. So that I'll say it's to that extent, platform like this.
Yes, that, and then, like for instance, recently my organization, the Fabulous Woman Network, we had a training for women to start and run their own businesses, and as part of it, we had a panel come to talk about opportunities available in Ghana and, for that matter, Africa with regards to business. We invited a lady who is a software developer to come and tell us about opportunities in tech, because usually we put that to the side. We don't even think about it. When we're thinking of business, we're thinking of money, money, money. We don't even see that there is money there as well. So to have all of these conversations, let's push these women who are, sorry, I keep talking about women because that's what I do. But these people who are already in the space and they are making things happen, let's support them, let's project them, let's make noise. It's the only way. We need to spend so much time creating awareness, having these conversations on panels, in the bus, wherever, to get the message out there. Because for me, even today alone, my mind has opened up even more, and I'm thinking you need to do more. So basically, yes, we all need to do more.
Barbara, keen to respond to that one?
I think they've already hashed on most of the things that we need to do as young people. I think the craziest thing for young people today is social media. So let's flood social media with awareness on jobs like this and situations where artificial intelligence is going to cause 7 million jobs to be lost. I don't think the average young person knows the reality of this, and to be able to think about their future and to be able to think about education. And I'm in school, what am I going to do afterwards? How am I going to address unemployment? What fields can I go into? And if we have good social media strategies, we can get to young people and get them talking about these things.
Would like to come to the floor once more just for questions and opportunities for you as audience members to raise your opinions and concerns. Any other questions on the floor? We see 2 hands here in the front from these 2 ladies and another hand at the back with you, sir. I think we'll start here with you, ma'am. The mic will move to you. Then we'll come to you, sir, with your question as we wrap up. Please stand up and introduce yourself, ma'am, and pose your question.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm a student at the University of Pretoria. I'm studying research in science. My question basically is looking at the socioeconomic structures and the gap between the rural and the urban communities. Implementation of artificial intelligence, in my opinion, might just furthermore those that are already based in the urban system. And then from a rural environment, I had to learn a lot coming to University of Pretoria to do research in computational biology. I didn't even know how to operate a computer. And then now looking at where I'm from and the situation that everyone where I'm from is in, it might be a lot of, I don't know, it might be a bit of a strain for people to move from that sector to a specific sector, looking at the gap in knowledge, the gap in resources. I mean, I don't know, I feel like it's it's going to take a lot from the government and the NGOs and everyone sitting in this room to make sure that things are implemented. And it might take a while for actually to get the actual results of what we're speaking about today. So we need to be a bit patient as well, I think.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. We'll build up on that question in just a moment. Your question, ma'am?
Good morning. My name is Ita Kanji Morangi, Minister of Higher Education, Training and Innovation, Namibia. It's unfortunate I missed the presentations, but I find it quite interesting catching up on your discussions here. I must say that one thing that is obvious is the fact that an education system that any country is pushing in Africa or anywhere else currently speaks to lifelong learning. And the reality also that I've observed, particularly in my country, is that those students who are at the universities currently, many of them will not only serve in the professions that they are qualifying for. They will change their careers at least twice. Now, my question to the panel is, in your own view and understanding, how best can education systems of countries actually make our graduates versatile and also be ready to retool later down the line of their careers to be able to adapt to whatever the industry may present as new careers? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister. Very imperative question there. We'll wrap up with you, sir, towards the back. Your question, please.
Good morning. My name is Shudu Machinatsimbi, speaking, attending from a school named Highlands North Boys High School. So my question is, wouldn't technology affect youth negatively, because it's already did? Let's say perhaps they give us to go and experiment, do an investigation about maybe, let's say, the use of root pressure with asylum, and then we're not going to actually go research, we're not going to do the experiment, we're just going to go to Google and search about it, and we're just going to get answers that maybe someone already posted there. So my question is, although they're going to create, robots and stuff, wouldn't people get lazy? Because now they're already robots and stuff already operating, and then wouldn't be a use of a human anymore. So I don't understand how it is gonna, we're actually gonna communicate with the thing in robotics. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your question, but very true, as it could lead to a result of a lack of versatility, a lack of skills development, alluded to in the earlier questions, which actually lead to a redundancy in certain skills. And of course, ultimately what you need is a workforce with a positive mindset, knowing that they're capable and able to empower themselves and needing to capitalize on that. I'd actually like us to address all three questions as we make our way across with all the panelists. And Zamantung, I'd like to start off with you, picking up on the question and theme that was raised from the university student with regard to the rural communities perhaps being further isolated and further interventions that might need to be identified there to ensure that there is connectivity as well as a multi-pronged approach to this kind of human development and implementation of technology across the board. And of course, given that you've also worked with students before, some advice with regard to education, how to make sure that our workforce can be versatile and agile enough to actually change and adopt new careers in the future. And of course, tying that into the question we had from the gentleman, making sure our workforce does not become lazy.
Okay, I love Angie's question actually, because that's where I specialize in rural areas. I'd say when we go to urban areas, that's where we get difficulties, because that's what I've observed with the youth that I work with, especially grade 12s, because they need to go to universities, they need to apply. And when you're applying, you're using your computer. They don't have access to computer. And then when they go to tertiary doing their first years, now ever in their life, they need to do their assignments, exams on computers. And then we have a tradition from I'm a Future Leader. We usually ask them, how was your first experience? And then a very learner who got 9 distinctions in his matric, he was saying that I got 13% in my computer skills. But then as the year continues, I spent so much time in learning computer. So you can see it makes them to lag as well, to now learn computer skills when they're in universities.
How do we fix that though? Let's solve solutions.
It's bringing ICT to rural areas. Like looking first at the infrastructure, look after infrastructure, like engage NPOs who've got an overview of the functionalities of the specific communities, because you can't bring people that do not know how the community is functioning. You must bring NPOs or any other person who's got information about that particular community. What I was saying about Angie's question as well, there is another student who now had to do computer science, which is much advanced than computer skills. So now again, it's spending so much time into learning computer programming, while this learner had shown so much intelligence in grade 12, getting 9 distinctions. So it's kind of lacking in a way, but then the government, NPOs, all other people must become involved in looking after people from rural areas.
Yeah.
And then another question about then people do not having skills and abilities or changing their degrees now and over again. I would say we should use advantage of the apps. There is an app that you put on your abilities. I don't know exactly how does it work, but I've heard about it. And they said if you just, maybe you love working outdoors, you just click that in. Maybe you like what colors or communicating with people, those kind of factors you put in down, and then it can be able to match you to the kind of career that you might take. So I'll say take use of such apps or technologies, please.
I'd like to come to you to get your view as well, especially coming back to the Minister's question on defensive education ministries and policies which actually allow our workforce to be adaptable in the future. You obviously see this given the training that you provide for both women as well as youth, but I think it also speaks to something with regard to the kind of topics and subjects, that we might be studying in schools. Does it mean drive strongly onto the focus of STEM courses, or involve arts and communications and other dynamics? Or do we actually need to look at degrees which incorporate all, different dynamics of particular areas of subject matter in order to cultivate some kind of creativity and flexibility within that flow? What have you seen with regard to your interactions and your advice perhaps to the Minister?
Okay, thank you very much. So I believe that the first step is to involve industry experts in these decision making. We cannot sit as policymakers or even teachers and just make these decisions when we may not necessarily be able to see ahead of time what's going to happen. Those in the industry, they can tell that, okay, in 2050, this is what we will need. So how do we train these people to match up to what we will need? That is one. And then also, okay, so I just lost my train of thought there, but yes, basically involving the industry in decision making, that's going to help. Yeah.
Involving the industry in decision making.
Yeah.
Barbara, you've obviously seen the trend of robotics and are quite involved as well with STEM. Are there other solutions and alternatives we can look at? And also addressing the gentleman's question at the back, making sure our workforce does not become lazy and a generation of Googlers without actually implementing research too.
Okay, for the Minister's question, I had an experience in October where, because of the African Union panel on emerging technologies, we had a trip to Harvard, and we had to go to some innovation labs in MIT and Harvard. And one thing I saw there that I do not see in our educational systems here is that with every project that a student goes on, you're churned out for the market. Like, you can finish school and start up. You're not just trained to know, it's not a knowledge-based training system. You're trained to be able to start your own company once you're done. We have African youth who are university graduates and can't write a CV. We have African youth who are university graduates, and when they send you an email, you have to use spell check. And it's really bad. So we have to go through the system whereby our education is not just knowledge, like you're just taking knowledge and pumping it into the student's head, but the student gets to the point where he's trying to find out, what can I do with the knowledge that I have obtained in the university? So when you write your master's thesis and you do a project and you publish in the scientific journals, what comes next? Yeah. How do you translate that that research into policies or into innovative products that can help the continent? And I think that's one thing that is lacking in our educational system that we really have to look at, not just pump us with knowledge where we can recite all the things in the world, but we don't know what to do with that knowledge in transforming our system. Excellent. And on the question from the student, I read a publication, I think it was by the OECD, where they were talking about the fact that the jobs of the future actually involves more emotional related jobs, because robots don't have emotions and artificial intelligence doesn't have emotions. And so yes, we may not necessarily be lazy because artificial intelligence is taking up admin jobs and basic tasks. We just have to revamp our job system ideals, because then in corporate relations and international relations and management and all that, you can't have a robot do that. Exactly. Because a robot wouldn't have emotions in order to understand what is going on. And then, so you would have a workforce that is geared towards higher hierarchy jobs that can control artificial intelligence-based systems that are doing the basic works in the admin level.
So the critical role is to upskill those individuals to be able to fulfill those positions there too. Exactly. I certainly hope that we've left you with a lot to think about here on the CNBC Africa broadcast, giving you insight into the dynamics of what African youth need to bear in mind regarding the future of digitalization, robotics, as well as artificial intelligence. It does bring us to the end of this live broadcast. However, the conversations will certainly continue here on the sidelines at the CSIR. Thank you so much to my audience members, as well as those of you who posed your questions and opinions to our panelists, and not forgetting my esteemed panelists who also joined us, giving us their insight. Barbara Glover, who's from NIPAD Planning and Coordinating Agency, Amar Duncan, who's a corporate training solutions based in Ghana, Dr. Zamantungwa Kumalo, Future Leader Youth Development Program, and of course, Admiral Joe Sestak from First Global based in the United States. You too can continue this conversation on social media and give us your insight onto some of the topics that have been shared. Tweet us at CNBC Africa using the official hashtag SFSA2017. It's been great being with you over this past hour. For CNBC Africa, I'm Kukuletu Tele.